Who exactly was Karl Marx? Obviously, most people associate him with communism, with philosophy or economics. Obviously, he co-authored the Communist Manifesto. But I have a theory about Karl Marx that if he was alive in today's day and age, he would actually be a fairly far right-wing Republican. Now, I know that sounds insane, him being the founder of the modern-day Communist Party, and communism being as far left-wing as you can possibly be as far as Western politics goes. However, it's important to understand what the climate or the atmosphere was in the Kingdom of Prussia, which is modern-day Germany. It's important to understand exactly how that system of government and how that economy functioned, because you can't look at the United States or the UK or any other Western capitalistic nation and apply the same standards. It's completely dissimilar. To really understand Marx and the birth of communism, you have to go back to the political atmosphere and the economic climate that Karl Marx was in. And you have to understand what the problems were that he was trying to fix with the creation of communism. Now, Karl Marx grew up in what's known today as Germany. Back then, it was the Kingdom of Prussia. And the Kingdom of Prussia was an authoritarian monarchy, meaning there was one king, and he dictated how the entire country was run, how the entire region was run. And it's important to understand that the relationship between the aristocrats, the upper class were called the aristocrats, then there was the bourgeoisie, and then the bottom tier, the lower class, was called the peasantry. And the bourgeoisie was kind of middle class. There was no chance for them really to get into the aristocracy, the upper class. But the peasantry was just, they lived like homeless people. They lived in squalor and filth and really terrible conditions. And there was a constant suppression from the aristocracy toward the bourgeoisie and the peasantry. So the aristocracy was often business owners, politicians, people at the very upper rung of society. And the working man was often the bourgeoisie or the peasantry. And they had barely enough to live, certainly, not enough to comfortably raise a family, terrible, hazardous working conditions, all of these problems. Karl Marx was a young guy in college, and he had always been interested in politics and economics, and he was always, coming up with different theories of how to run things, and he was very politically and economically involved, even as a very young child. The undertone of his upbringing was very much retaliation against the aristocracy, very much opposed to the upper class, because of the terrible conditions that he and everyone he knew grew up in. Now, to be thinking with why Karl Marx came up with communism and the problems he was trying to fix with the authoring of the Communist Manifesto, it's important to understand what his reality was at this time and the problems that he was trying to solve. And the social landscape of the Kingdom of Prussia at this time was very, very, very different from the capitalistic system that you see in Western nations now, despite what any of the blue-haired communists in Portland and Seattle and San Francisco try to convince you of today. Now, to define communism and capitalism, communism is total government intervention. No commerce, nothing in the economy can take place without government intervention. That's communism. Capitalism is kind of the exact opposite of that, where it believes in very little government intervention. Now, at this time, capitalism was associated with corporate greed and giving the working man very little opportunity to rise up in society and to make something of himself. But in actuality, that 19th century Germanic style of capitalism was actually very close to what's known as communism today. What I mean by that is there was no free market system. Pretty much the only people succeeding in the economy then were people who had monopolized industries and were intertwined with government officials. And every industry was very heavily monopolized. There was very little people coming up with different business ideas, starting it from scratch, building businesses. There was very little of that. Almost every industry was very heavily monopolized by a company that had been in that sector for a while. And in most instances, that company was intertwined with the government in some way. Unless you were born into the aristocracy, there was very little chance to get into the upper crust of society. You had to be born into it for the most part. Now, Karl Marx, to his total credit, observed a lot of these issues, and he was completely right. The structure and the setup of the economy at this time was completely unfair. You know, in an ideal world, the ones who bring the most value to society are rewarded the most, and the ones who bring the least value to society are rewarded the least. Karl Marx observed a lot of these issues, and to his total credit, he wanted to fix them. His intention with creating communism was to take the power from big corporations and big industries and put it into the hands of the working man. That's what his real intention was with communism. He wanted to redistribute wealth and power and put it into the hands of the working man to make society a little more fair. Totally valuable, totally valid. Very ironically, what communism actually achieves is the exact style of capitalism that we saw back then, which is all of the power is held by the government and by the aristocracy, by the people that control big corporations that are intertwined with the government. In any application of real communism, what we've seen has been the only people succeeding in that society are the government officials and the people that run big corporations that are often intertwined in the government. This has been seen in the Soviet Union, run by Vladimir Lenin. This has been seen in China, run by Mao Zedong. This has been seen in Cuba, led by Fidel Castro. One of the main differences between communism and capitalism is in capitalism today, the government has some control and some oversight over how business can be conducted. With communism, there is no oversight for the government. So the government, there is no regulating body for the government telling the government how they can operate. In capitalism, there is the external non-benefiting entity, i.e. the government, that can dictate how they run. In an ideal world, this government, there's no special interest, which in America and pretty much every country, we don't have that. There is special interest. There are politicians that are still in bed with pharmaceutical companies and media companies and, educational institutions and all these different things. So it's not that there is no work that needs to be done in a capitalist system, but structurally, in capitalism, there is a non-benefiting party, the government, that oversees how business can be conducted, thinking with the benefit of all of its citizens. In communism, the state holds the power, and no one has any influence over how the state can operate. A good solution to the problem that Karl Marx was trying to solve back then is what we have now, which is labor unions. So it was understood that if there's company X and company X doesn't pay fair wages and there's hazardous work conditions and the employees are not okay with how they're being treated, they can band together, go on strike, and what's most important for the corporation is money. And if the corporation's production stopped, the employees sort of forced the hand of that company to, appease them and to start treating them fairly, or else the corporation cannot continue without its employees. So that's a very good solution that we have adopted now that I think would have helped some of the problems Karl Marx was looking at when he was younger. Ceasing all production for an organization and also all income for it is a great negotiation tactic that labor unions have constructed today. You've heard about going on strike, that they've created today to help mitigate some of these problems so that there are fair working conditions, fair wages, all these different things. Constantly today you see different labor unions going on strike when they have demands that need to be met. The most fair system of government, which is what communism is going for, it's going for fairness and equality. The most fair is an economy where the most productive, valuable members to that society are rewarded the most, and the least productive members are rewarded the least. This is obviously what the most fair outcome is. In capitalism, you can be born in terrible conditions, in complete poverty, and if you provide enough value for society, if you become some form of entertainer or athlete or start some kind of a business or become prominent enough in society, you can create an amazing fortune for yourself. And you see that all the time. Business leaders, leaders in medicine, leaders in sports and entertainment, all these different industries. There's so many different avenues in a capitalistic system for you to make something of yourself. And vice versa in capitalism, you can be born into an incredibly wealthy family. And if you don't manage your money well enough, and if you don't continue to provide a value for society, your money goes away. You see this as well. Most of the wealthy families from the 19th and 20th century in the United States and in Europe, most of those families no longer have any fortunes because somebody 7 generations ago, 5 generations ago, provided an incredible service, an incredible amount of value to that society at that time. And 2 generations later, there's little work ethic instilled, and the descendants of those people who originally were very hard workers and created something amazing, the descendants a few generations later no longer provided that same value. So they went broke. And now you don't know anything about the Vanderbilt family, the Rockefellers, the Flagler family, these amazing families that have these incredible fortunes. The Getty family. These guys don't have any money because there was no work ethic instilled in future generations. In communism, no one can come out of their economic class. Everybody's in the same economic class. Nobody can rise up, ever, under any circumstances. So why do I say Karl Marx would fall into the Republican Party today? Well, it's very simple. He saw a problem and cared enough about society. And to his credit, he was completely right in the problem that he identified. It was a very unfair system where you had to be born into wealth to make something of yourself. It was very linear. The economy was very linear. You couldn't fall out of classes very easily. He knew that a problem was there and he wanted to fix it. And what he did about it was he worked really hard in an attempt to create a better economy for that time. Now again, you can't look at a modern Western society and perfectly equate it to what he was looking at and what he was dealing with then. The economies were totally different. The structures of government were totally different. The problems that citizens were faced with were completely different. And I say Karl Marx would have fallen into the Republican Party today because this structure of capitalism fixes a lot of those problems that they were dealing with. In this capitalism, there is a structure of government. This is not where we don't live in an anarchy. There is a structure of government. We can agree and disagree about how much government intervention there should be. I'm not an anarchist. I don't believe there should be no government. But the restrictions by a government on corporations is minimal, but still present. And again, between capitalism, you can argue about how much government intervention there should be, and about the efficacy of the government officials that create the policy. Because in America, there really is not much ethics in American politics, European politics right now. There's a lot of special interests. There's a lot of, politicians who are formerly on the board of directors for different corporations. So they put in policy, helping this industry and harming that industry. And there's a lot of that going on, which is not ideal. It definitely needs to be corrected. But as a system of government itself, capitalism allows for some government intervention to legislate corporations so that pay is fair and there are workable conditions and people can work a not insane amount of hours and still live a very comfortable life. That's what capitalism allows for. Again, in communism, it doesn't allow for that. It puts everybody into the same bucket except for the aristocracy. That's what we've seen time and time again. He knew there were problems present and he cared enough and wanted to fix them. Unfortunately, it just so happens that the solution he came up with puts society back into the exact same problems that they were at then. The only difference being the ones controlling everything, instead of it overtly being the people that run big corporations like it was with capitalism back then, in communism, it's more covert. It's the government, elected by the people for the people. However, the government officials in communism are the only ones that are living in posh wealth and living lavish lifestyles. The publicly elected officials and the people that ran these mega corporations, which in the instances I mentioned before, are almost often intertwined. But his viewpoint back then honestly was very reflective of a modern day Republican viewpoint. And to equate the atmosphere back then of the Kingdom of Prussia to a modern day Western country today is completely false. Is our modern system perfect? Not by any means. Do we wish no one was born into poverty? Yeah, absolutely. Do we wish everyone had a strong chance to succeed and live a comfortable, happy, healthy life? Yeah, definitely. But none of that is the government's responsibility. All right, that's it for this episode. I've released 2 other episodes in this similar kind of niche. Definitely do go check those out and subscribe to this channel for further content in the same niche.